Okay, folks, we are at time, so if you could start finding your seats. I'm sure more people will come in as we go, but if you could start finding your seats, that would be good.
Also, a reminder, if you're in the room, you need to scan the QR code to sign in for the blue sheets, and there is a piece of paper that is actually blue up on the second row there if you'd like to scan that instead of the one on the screen. You have the little blue sheet. You can just hold it up, pass it around. Oh, yeah, see if anybody needs. But it's from Switzerland. We'll see how
you're going to be in charge of this.
We'll see how it competes.
We're going to the next slide.
Yeah, you want to go? So we ask them to close the door. All right, well, while Ted is walking back to close the door, maybe we can just kick it off. So thanks everybody for coming to Media Over Quick. Here's the note well, and MOQ finally got an early in the week slot, so maybe it's pay a little bit more attention than you have in our previous sessions, but this is very important information that defines the rules by which we participate here, code of conduct, anti-harassment, IPR, etc. So if you have not, please make sure that you take a good look at this information. Tips. So if you are here, make sure you have signed in. As I mentioned earlier, there is an actual blue sheet with the QR code that you can sign in on, and you will use the little MeetEcho Lite client to join the queue, and make sure your audio and video is off. You want to do the rest, or? Okay. Okay, so our agenda is posted. We'll bash it shortly. We have notes at that link, and we did get one volunteer note taker on the ahead of time. We do have a really fancy chocolate up here. If somebody else wants to help out with the notes, you can claim a bar of chocolate at the end. But maybe not. Here's our note taker steaming in. So
sorry, wrong room.
That's okay. We've so far covered the note well. And Ted and I will relay anything that you need said from the chat. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today, I think we're going to just kind of go over what the administrative trivia we've already done, and then also just kind of an update on documents, since there has been some shifts since the last plenary IETF. And then our new editor of the mock transport draft, Ian, is going to go through some of the open issues. And then we have a presentation at the end from Will Law covering the warp streaming format draft and the updates that have happened there. And that will cover what's going on today. And then on Wednesday, which is the next slide, there'll be sort of a follow-up for additional issues with the warp draft and also with mock transport. And then we will have some presentations on usages, the low overhead container, and some results from some prioritization experiments. And we will talk about scheduling, interim, and wrap up. Does anybody have anything they would like to bash on the agenda for day 1 or 2? Okay. Then Ian is making his way up to talk about issues. Oh, no, wait, we need to talk about documents first.
Well, Ian is part of what we're talking about for the documents, so he can get up there and get in the box anyway, because one part of it is to let people know, in addition to accepting the mock transport draft as an official working draft, we are welcoming Ian as our editor of that draft. So he's joining the author team to help us get through the issues and to get the draft to completion. Thank you very much, Ian, for volunteering. We also have a couple of new drafts this time, and as we go through them, we'll be discussing when it's time to move them into working group sessions. So we've already moved the warp draft into the common repository, so people can use that common repository to record issues against it, et cetera. But we haven't yet accepted it as a working group draft, and that seems to be kind of the process that we'll use. As things start to get working group discussion, they'll move into the common repository so we can have a common issues practice around them. And once people are satisfied that there's something that we should be working on inside the working group, they'll move into being draft IETF-MOQ, and we'll keep them in that repository as a successor. So as a reminder, we have 2 working group drafts already, the requirements draft and MOQT, and we're have warp and now lock as proposals to have media formats on top of them. And that's sort of part of what we'll be covering tomorrow. Is there kind of questions from a process perspective? Cullen, you're in the...
Just a clarifying question. So I mean, there's been lots of discussion about lock as well. So lock is in you're going to move it into the working group repo because that'd be easier to put issues and everything on it. Is that
so
what I just heard?
we're going to ask the working group tomorrow after it's presented whether they're ready for us to do that, and that will be the point that goes in after.
But we didn't ask the working group on any of the other 3 drafts. But yeah, I'm all in. It sounds good.
Actually, we did for warp though at the interim. Any other questions? Okay, I think we're ready to go to Ian then. Do you want to present?
Okay. Oh, you need to, I'm sure.
All right. I'm Ian Sweat. I work at Google. I've been working on video in various forms and video delivery for a very, very long time, pretty much since I joined Google almost 12 years ago, starting at YouTube and then subsequently more on the cloud TI side. Obviously very involved in the quick effort, and I'm excited to be here and be more involved with MOQ. And you know, my goal is very much to try to help the working group and all of you make good progress and ideally fairly expedient progress on getting the transport draft to the point where it's fairly buttoned up, you know, something we can actually ship to production. People can really start getting production experience with.
Hold on, man.
That's okay. I have a few slides, not too many slides on issues, but I did also have a few slides on kind of how I hope to kind of approach the process. Your feedback is welcome. And part of these came from the quick working group as well as other working groups that use GitHub extensively. But I also had some thoughts that were specific to the MOQ issues, which I'll go into. Okay, next slide.
So we're doing this sort of a funny way because of the last minute thing, so we'll have to find your...
Oh, okay.
But you did not update. How nice.
Interesting. So I moved it. It seems to change.
Is it too late for me to load the slides back over?
I just don't know why it's not showing what I'm seeing. Sorry, folks, we uploaded a new version of it and it's showing in the meeting materials tool, but when we try and hit the share preloaded slides, it's not turning up.
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Can you just share it from your computer?
Yeah, we tried that and it didn't
Oh.
move between left and right then.
Okay. Okay. Never mind.
Okay, so we are,
Okay, just done.
Lorenzo says he's just done it. Thank you.
There. Next slide. Fingers crossed. Okay. Welcome. So this is my unofficial Media Over Quick logo because we don't have one. See a number of different types of media there. Number of firsts in particular. And yeah, next slide. Yeah. At least when I made this slide, there were 78 open issues. That already changed from when I first made this slide, like 8 hours earlier. So obviously there's a fair bit of churn. 15 are currently marked architectural, which I, at this point, am taking to mean design of some sort. There are some on there that probably don't really need to be marked architectural, and probably quite a number that are not marked as such that probably should be tagged or at least kind of managed, but that's another issue. I've created a new naming tag. It's pretty clear that there are a number of open issues and historically have been a number of open issues around naming. And because those do not affect the wire format, but they are important, I want to make sure that we kind of like break those out separately. So some things just probably need a PR, quite honestly. I don't think there's a ton of those, but there are a few. Obviously, you should feel free to write them. I also created a new needs PR tag, and I will write something sensible if people slap a needs PR tag on there and it's pretty clearly editorial or like a very minor design change. One favor for all of you, and the biggest issue is probably some of these issues are quite old, and they could use to be updated or just straight up closed. I also, as I'll talk in a moment, added a new not transport tag, which is an indication of an issue that is in the repo, but is not a transport issue. That will help Will kind of triage and try to decide like what to move over, either directly or copy important content from. So this is all kind of process administrivia stuff, but it is important, and I do feel like given there are quite a number of open issues, and I'm sure there will be many more to be filed, once you start dealing with 100-ish issues, it's nice to have a bit of organization. Next slide. Great. So obviously GitHub issues can always be reopened, ideally with new information. So we're just not opening and closing things. As much as possible, I prefer issues either be editorial or design and not both. And this just makes it easier to kind of argue about one thing at once. Otherwise the issues can kind of go back and forth between the two. Or similarly naming or editorial or design. I mean, it doesn't really matter. The other thing I've noticed is that some things are marked proposals today. My personal preference is to actually have PRs for those and then discuss the proposal on the issue. I don't know if how the working group feels about that change though. So I wanted to throw that out there and get feedback. Do people?
Suhas.
Okay, thank you.
Suhas, Cisco. I agree with you, Ian. We created our proposals because it was a bit confusing at that point in time when we had multiple issues and PRs and we didn't have a proper way to define that one. It was something that requires an issue and also goes along with a proposal to explain how it can be solved.
Yep.
I think it would be nice to go with a proposal with an issue. We can always discuss if that issue is worth the PR in the issue, but if the PR specific comments can be resolved in the PR. So going together makes more sense. Thanks.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, and then I'll try to head in that direction, but obviously I'm not going to go through and try to rectify all these overnight. But I do think it makes it easier to kind of track workflow. Luke?
Yeah, the underlying issue is there were just too many PRs. we'd just file PRs without talking about it, and then we'd have to review comments and be like, why are we filing this PR? So I think if we just talk about, on an issue, like what the plan is, agree that this is worth making a PR, and then I think that's a better plan than proposal.
Oh, that probably is sensible as well. Victor?
I think my main problem would be make sure that every PR has like a corresponding issue.
Yes.
So we don't argue about solutions without like going back to the problem.
Yep.
That we're trying to solve.
Yes, please. I guess I should have stated that, but yes, definitely make sure your PRs are linked to issues, design or otherwise, and so that way everyone can kind of track like how the changes occurred and how things got closed, all of those processes. There's an RFC all about GitHub usage guidance, which goes into many details and much more than I would ever want to right here. Do people have any other thoughts or suggestions of how they want me to try to help the working group guide this, or is what I've said sounded sensible to people? Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not going to use this. I think it'd be a good idea to schedule a call with the existing author teams and talk to them about how they've been doing the stuff and, see what it was. That'd be a great starting point.
Okay. I am happy with that. Let's move on. I did notice, and this is certainly not an exhaustive list, but there are a number of issues that are probably out of scope for transport. I marked a few of them as not transport already. The one actually I would like some feedback on today is there's this issue of failover when quick is not available. My reading of the charter is that this is probably not in scope for the media over quick working group, but it certainly seems out of scope for the quick transport draft. Do people want editorial text to kind of go into the fact that, yes, you either need to fall back to TCP or web transport over TCP or something if you exist in an environment where quick might not work? Or are they happy with the existing text and I can just close this with no action? If no one says anything, I will do nothing by default.
Mosinati, I think we had some discussion about this earlier, that some people voiced opinions that media over quick doesn't make a lot of sense to have a fallback of something other than quick. You would maybe fall back at a higher level and do media over TCP or H2 or something. It doesn't make sense to just replace the quick layer. You probably go to a higher level and replace the entire media over X layer.
I agree. And so does that mean people would like me to write up an editorial PR to kind of address that point, or does that not need to be said because everyone understands it?
I'm happy to write a PR if you
that's even better.
Yeah.
I'm happy to review.
It should just be like a 1 or 2 sentence blurb
that's great.
in the draft.
Okay, wonderful. Do you mind making a note and then assigning the issues? 88. Okay. Next slide.
We need to redo this. Hold on. We had a technical.
Yeah, sorry, I got the dreaded connection to server unstable, so we're starting again.
5, 6. Okay. So now I'm going to go through a few issues that seemed worth discussing here, and then we can go into the longer issues list later. I went through all the architectural issues in detail and tried to pick out ones that I thought we might be able to make progress on. So this is the issue of who chooses the track ID, whether it's the client or the server. And currently subscribe OK includes a mapping. However, possibly you could receive objects prior to the subscribe OK message, and that becomes ambiguous. So the proposal is to move it from the association from the server side to the client side. There's not a PR for this yet, but do people have opinions on this? And is there support or objection? It seemed like there was mild support for doing this on the issue, but there weren't a lot of diversity of comments.
Jonathan Rosenberg, 5'9". I haven't been participating much on the list, so I apologize if this was discussed. The problem with the client selecting it is it is a trust issue. Like, do you trust it to pick an identifier that doesn't collide on the server, which they need to not collide? So I would be worried about having the client assign it.
Cullen Jennings. Yeah, I roughly say what Jonathan says here. When we talked about CDN people, some of the CDN implementations that we're trying to leverage and sit on top of today already have a unique identifier in their architecture, which they work across it and they assign and make sure is unique across the CDN. And that's a really desirable property for them to leverage their existing stuff. Now, other CDNs don't have that. They just use like an identifier that maps to a tuple identifier or a flow identifier or something like that. Okay. And so we've discussed this a lot. It wasn't discussed on that particular issue, but it's been discussed in the working group a bunch. And I would argue very strongly for effectively it's not so much as in the subscribe okay or not. I totally get Luke's message problem that this causes, right, of the message routing. But I would argue we need to allow the servers to assign this. And the reason why is it makes it much easier to leverage existing architectures. And also it gives you real performance improvements. If you're trying to do a lot of switching and relaying, if you can have a unique identifier that you can use hash indexes and other things that is unique. Now, the only way to do it uniquely is make sure that the servers and relays in this case are assigning it, not the clients are assigning it. So I think there's a strong argument there. Now, that does cause exactly the problem Luke pointed out, which is there is this weird sort of race condition, but I think there's many ways to solve that race condition and that we should solve those a different way. And I'd argue against changing this.
Okay, thanks.
Suhas.
So Cisco, just to give some context, I wrote this PR first, and when the first PR was written, the track ID was on the client, and we went through extensive discussion over 6 weeks on just this topic, and some of the points what Cullen mentioned, and made us to kind of come to the conclusion that track ID being given by server is more useful, and on the issues of what would happen if the packets come before. We've been solving this for a long time in RTP and other places where if the keys are not there, if packets come, the clients have to make a decision either to hold it for some time, X amount of seconds or what, and then the keys come, they decrypt it. So I don't think so that's a major issue to kind of change this, redo this discussion again. Thanks.
Okay. You should.
Will's next. I'm sorry, if they don't leave the queue, then you can't see them on your screen.
Yeah. I was going to add, so it sounds like this is a problem that is solvable with reasonable mechanisms by buffering content today. And so, though that's annoying, it's not a critical issue is what I'm hearing, and that the alternatives are potentially more problematic for CDNs than helpful. But that's my summary of so far. Will.
Yeah, Will Law Akamai. So we care about CDNs. I agree wholeheartedly with Cullen that we'd like to have a unique identifier within the network. However, I think we can get to make it work even if the client selects it. Sure. If we go back to the first question, if the client selects something that's not unique on the CDN, the client doesn't have to do that. It just has to pick a track ID that's unique on that connection. It's scoped to the connection. The server could reject it if it sees there's already that number being used, so it can enforce uniqueness. And then it can accept it. And then in the CDN, we can make up our own unique name and just have a lookup table for this session. The tuple of the session plus the track ID would then be unique across our network.
Yes, no, I agree. It's clear that you can make a lookup table from a given session track ID to the global one.
Luke.
Oh, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
Luke here. So the track ID behaves a lot like QPAC, actually, where the idea is it's an index and a lookup table, so you can take an integer and convert it to a string. The issue is right now you can effectively reference an index before it's being acknowledged. Effectively in QPAC terminology is that you can send a request with an ID that the other side doesn't yet know about, maybe, and then it just has to hold that request until eventually it receives that mapping. And I understand, like, it'd be nice if we could hard code QPAC dynamic table updates, for example, for CDN performance, but that is probably less important than making sure that objects are decodable when they're received. So I think they're both minor. I mean, I'm writing a player. I really hate the fact that it could be an unknown object. I don't know what it is. I have to wait for eventually this lookup entry. I would like to don't use that lookup entry until I tell you I have it. or let me choose it.
Colin's next.
I mean, I agree with Luca that this is miserable, but I think there's a different solution to it. And we've discussed a three-way handshake multiple times as a way. I mean, I think the thing is, I think that trying to queue the objects until they're ready to use, until you have all the information to use them, that's painful. I get that. So the two solutions are discard them because you don't need them anyway, which a bunch of types, classes of applications can easily do that. Some classes of applications that can't easily do that. But there's also the solutions to make sure nobody sends you the objects until you have this identifier and you have the way to do it. And that's the solution path I think we should go down is solving it that way.
Okay, so that incurs an extra round trip, but is that correct?
Not necessarily. I mean, the way this ends up overlapped with things, I think you'd have to look at the call flows of that really carefully. And in many cases, it probably doesn't actually add, it might add a half an RTT, but it might not. And I think you could do some analysis in that and decide whether you cared.
Okay. Colin, is that written up on the issue? Because I don't think I saw it.
No, definitely not. This is a very late filing of a reissue that was discussed many times, and I don't even. I went and tried to look like, hey, can I find the original discussion? I can't find anything useful for you. I apologize.
Oh no, of course. No. If you wouldn't mind summarizing what you just wrote on the issue, just so it's recorded and everything, about your proposed alternate solution and why you think it's perfect.
Okay, I'm not even sure it's my proposal. I'm just sort of like throwing out my. Yeah, sure. I'm glad to try and do that, but I don't mean to be. This is. Yep, I'm regurgitating something from long ago. I don't know who did it.
Yep. I wasn't trying to focus on attribution, but I did want to make sure it's written down. Victor, I assume, is next. I can't see. Oh, I guess I can see.
I personally favor requester issued subscriber IDs. So it's not just only because of the buffering issue, but the other problem is if we assume that we'll let CDNs assign some globally unique track IDs, those would probably be fairly large. And since we send those track IDs often, that's overhead that builds up. Because if they're picked by the client, you'll likely have one byte log track ID, which is different from 4 to 8 bytes, which it will probably end up if it's global.
Yes, I agree. That is a very good point. It's very easy to end up with 8-byte track IDs in that case, or longer. Okay. Alan.
I jumped in as an individual because I had some comments on this issue. I think one point I think I had made in there is that if you think about this track ID as much like the quick stream ID, where it's the client is choosing it, but there's a prescribed algorithm for doing so. It's very predictable and it seems to work okay. And I liked that property. And then the one use case it solves the buffering problem, but it leaves out this case where maybe the server has a special ID it would really like to use. And so I sort of think maybe the proposal is to build an alias mechanism that for servers that care that much, maybe they can send a message and wait for an acknowledgement and say okay, now this track ID means the same as this other track ID if they really need to choose it. But I think having the client choose it simplifies a lot of stuff.
I appreciate the fact that it is similar to Quick. I agree. That is certainly nice. I would like to close the queue soon, but please continue because
Mosinati, I think I'm trying to remember all the details. We did have a lot of discussions about this. I'm trying to remember all the details, but the clear outcome of this is that not enough details were captured, and there's still some contention around this issue. So I don't think we'll close it right here, at this minute. I think we should follow up on the list. But from my recollection, a lot of the points raised in the RTP world about having, SRCs that collide or payload type numbers that have to be remapped at the servers because the clients chose them. A lot of those issues were surfaced, and so having coordination of them by the server made sense. But the more I think about it now, it seems like a bad argument because that's assuming a model where there's a central server that's the server for the conference or something. And in this case, we're expecting a hierarchy of relays, not a single relay. So then that kind of falls apart because now do you want the first relay to be able to assign this ID, or should Akamai's relay be able to assign it, or should Cloudflare's relay be able to assign it? And if one of them has to remap, does it really make a difference if both of them had to remap? So I think the remapping arguments may actually be a little specious if we think about them in detail in this hierarchy model of not a single server.
That's a great point.
So I think that's a good reason to maybe go back to the client model that we already had.
Yep, excellent point. In this case, many of these servers are also clients. So,
Okay. Ready to move on to the next one?
yes, I would like to move on to the next one, please. Add comments. If we can get this resolved this week, that would be amazing, but I realize that might not be possible, but thanks for adding all the extra info and throw it on the issue as well to make sure it's all written down. Okay. Splitting control and data streams. So Quick, for example, has typically uses control streams, or at least HP3 does, for things like QBAC and other such things, and keeps them separate from data. Quick streams are header line blocking, which actually can be a feature sometimes, because in this case, controlled messages have a well-defined ordering of how they will be received and processed. There's also this kind of vaguely related issue about prioritization, but like, let's kind of put that aside. But all three of these issues kind of like go around this concept of control and data streams and how they're organized and how they're used. There was some seemingly reasonable support for splitting control and data streams, as other protocols have done. That would be the most incremental change here. And then we could potentially kind of try to like re-summarize like all the other issues here. But I wanted to get people's thoughts on that sort of change.
I'm going to give up on the app. Say more about what you mean. I thought they were split.
Or no,
I mean, the data, like we're talking about sending each object frame. Say, Luke.
So the current draft says that any message can be sent over any stream for any reason at any time. There's no ordering. There is some text in the draft that says that a message should be sent on the same stream as when it modifies, like if you hope. But right now we just don't have that. And what this proposal is just copying what H3 does. Is you have a settings frame that starts a stream and you send control messages on that.
Okay. Yeah, as Luke said, right now the draft is agnostic on how you use the streams.
Okay, but how we use the streams, like that's a topic, like that's a big topic that needs a bunch of architectural discussion, totally. But I think it's how we use the streams for not even the control messages may be more important. What a control message is very key here too. I'm not sure we agree on that. And a control message is not a term the draft defines, right? That's not a concept in this draft.
Sure.
And Luke, I get your point of the draft's probably completely confused on what it says right now, like for sure we need to fix or whatever. But I think we need, I don't think describing this as split control and data streams, although I'm in favor of that in general. I thought that's what we already had, whatever, but I'm not even sure what that means. I think we'd need to look at each one of these individually and get much more specific about what we were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, they all kind of overlap in ways that were difficult to summarize, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think in the current draft, it's valid to send an object message on a stream and then follow with a subscribe message immediately after that object on the same stream, which is, yeah, exactly. You should never do that, but it's not required.
It is not forbidden. Okay, let me see if I can try to pound like these ideas into shape and everything, but they do overlap a lot in the issues. So
I think I was just going to ask, like, for the same thing, just if you can just clarify. It sounds like what you're saying is that you're planning to change which messages can be sent on the same kinds of streams. And I just would like, if that's what it is, what exactly these messages can be sent on this kind of stream and these messages can be not mixed with those kinds of messages.
Yes, that would be the tentative proposal. Yeah, at least as a start.
Mosinati, I think it would be a mistake to put all control messages on the same stream, not to have a control stream, because I think there may be messages, even if our current messages don't have this requirement, there may be messages which are tightly coupled to the context of the stream. So if you had a point in the stream at which that message was relevant, it wouldn't make sense to throw it over to a control stream. Now you'd have to have some data in that message to point to the object or point in the stream that it cares about, the stream itself, to point to the stream that you cared about, and then where in that stream you cared about it. So I think it makes a lot more sense to have some messages that are in the context of the stream of the data than it does to push them all to a control stream.
Okay, well, let me go back through, and I think this all relates to Colin's point about what exactly defines what a control message is. So Oh, Christian's still in the queue, and then I was hoping to close this out, and then we can.
Christian's the last one.
Yep.
Yeah. This business of a control stream, I think that having a control stream is a great simplification, because we do have cases in which we'll transform, for example, one object per stream. So one track might be thousands of streams. And some of those streams will not actually be sent. They might be reset for whatever reason, because they are too old, because whatever. And if that leads to losing control, that's a really bad idea. So I am all for personally having one control stream per track with the controls of that track. And there may be an exception in the case in which there is exactly one stream per track. You don't, in that case, need to separate. But pretty much in all the other cases, it's just insanity to do it otherwise.
Okay. Sure. If you want to respond to that, Joss.
Yes, like I'm trying to raise hand, but it never loads anything here. Okay. I think I agree with Christian. We did had a proposal at some point, which we closed to later discussion. The idea was to have one control stream per track, because depending upon the mapping that you want to use, how do you want to map one object to stream, one group to stream, track to stream, the multiple substreams that get created. Having a control stream per track basically says, if you close that one, everything will go away. That's kind of a garbage collection kind of a thing, right? And I agree, our current draft should specify what are control messages, like the one that helps to set up things. Those things have to be separately defined and identified. There are two issues that we need to do, and both needs to be discussed further.
Okay, thanks. That's very good input.
Lucas jumped in at the last minute.
Oh, all right.
Hey, Lucas Party, Cloudflare. I think, yeah, I jumped in because this kind of one control stream per thing is different than HB3's control stream, which effectively lives for the entirety of the connection. You can never close it, otherwise you screw everything up and it dies. If you have a control stream for something that's shorter lived during the whole quick connection, you could probably do it, but it's going to cause a lot of like edge cases of what happens if the control stream is sent and you still have the data plane sending data, and what to do then. Like, I think we probably need to get some stuff written down and review and maybe work through the possible failure modes for this thing. But generally, yeah, I agree. A control stream for strict ordering of control messages that need to be processed in order is going to simplify a lot of the problems we might have. Cheers.
Okay, thanks. I'll try to, like, as I said, go through and understand all the individual problems here, because I mean, this is obviously a change. It is not a statement of problems, even though there are a number of problems kind of potentially embedded within this. And hopefully once we can summarize those more effectively, we can figure out a clearer path forward. Next slide. Victor kindly wrote this one up about streaming format negotiation. I am actually, may I ask Victor to come to a mic and walk through it himself?
Sure. So there is a question of how do we negotiate stream format, and there are multiple ways, but the one that's like conceptually simple in terms of like using the same concepts we use already in mock transport is basically whenever you define a streaming format, you give it like a well-defined track name where the catalog for that streaming format would be. And then you just attempt to subscribe to that format, and then if you support it, and if it does not exist, you subscribe to the next one, etc. And the part of the proposal is like to extend the subscribe message to let you do that in one subscribe. That's basically the gist of it.
Thank you. Will.
Yeah, Will Loakamai. Actually, in my slide deck that's coming up, I have a slide addressing this proposal, and there's 4 different solutions that I put them all side by side, so we can maybe revisit this argument at that time. It might be a little clearer as to what some of the options are.
Is this in scope for the transport draft? Maybe that's a more important question.
I would say no, unless we define baseline rules for how streaming formats, in order to interop on top of mock transport, can declare their names. But really, you're defining a subscribe and then a string, and we need the notion that it's a catalog that's entirely in the streaming format side, not in the transport side.
Okay.
So I do think it's more of a streaming format issue.
Okay. Victor had one comment, but maybe we can see your slides and then it'll be clear to the group whether it's transport or not transport.
I wanted to answer the question of whether it belongs to transport. The answer is we should have some answer on how to do like format negotiation in the transport. This is the one that is like less intrusive. There are like alternative ways, but like this is something that has to happen in the transport, since you have to have some form of like offer alternatives and accept, or the server offer alternatives and you accept. And that has to, like, the protocol has to be aware, otherwise you just are stuck in requesting one catalog.
Yeah, perfect. Next,
Ted Hardy is an individual. I think that it would be somewhat odd if we ended up with a system where what matching means is different according to the media thing on top of the transport. So I think at the baseline, we have to be clear of what this type of matching is at this layer, so that all of the people who build on top of it use the same matching algorithm. And what they do with it might be very different. But if we're going to have, some people do longest match and some people do exact match and some people do something else, it's going to be very, very confusing to be able to build a system on top of this. So I do think there might be a small piece of this that does stay in transport that's about the syntax appropriate for expressing the semantics you want.
that exact question, I think, is 2 slides in the future.
All right.
Thanks, Ted. Oh, Sebastian.
So Cisco, I agree with Ted. Also, there are a couple of things, right? There's the streaming format, and there's the catalog format, there's the package container format. And we have a couple of catalog formats, like you can send your catalogs in JSON versus binary or some CBOR tomorrow. So how would I express as an announcer, as a subscriber, to tell what kind of parser I want to use to parse my catalog? And also the other things, like you want to use web codex-based packaging format, or you want to use CMAF. I'm not sure if we have to define those 2 levels individually. It might be, there might be some benefits if you separate those 2 things. I can have binary catalog and CMAF, or JSON catalog and log is kind of the application decision. And having it both in subscribe and announce might help in that case.
Colin, look, agree with the general principle here, and we'll see Alan's slides, and I like Victor's proposal. Like the basic thing we're talking about is good. Now, on the topic of which draft it goes in, I mean, if we make I think we have the decision coming up of, do we make a common catalog draft? If we make a common catalog draft, I think that's the obvious place to put this information. But if we don't have a common catalog draft, I think it's no big deal to really throw it in the transport, even though it's not directly transport. It's to put the minimal thing in the transport that the derived catalog drafts all rely on and use. So, either way, I view this as sort of like, throwing text around the bridge is no big deal, like either way.
Yep, I mean, this is not overly complex, so I'm fine with keeping it in transport. Next slide. There are a number of things about clean, subscribe, unsubscribe. This issue does not attempt to summarize all of them, but the core idea is that there's kind of no really clear fin functionality today. There's a few ways you can potentially do it, like reset with no error. You could add new frame. You could potentially add something to the catalog that basically says this is the end of this catalog. I had a chat with a few people today so far, and I think I don't want to actually discuss this today at the moment, but I want to put it in everyone's mind, and I want people to kind of think about it, post on the issue, and if there's interest in activity, maybe we can come back to it later in the week. But I think it felt like we were still kind of at the, like, here are some things you could do phase rather than the clear proposal phase, was my impression. But I do want everyone to kind of eyeballs on it. All right, next slide. So this is a very short slide. This is the ambiguity that I think Ted was alluding to, which is about naming, and I believe this is, Alan, your issue. And so I don't know if you'd like to speak to it as an individual.
I can try to remember what's in the issue because I wrote it a little while ago. But the idea is that two clients can each announce different namespaces where maybe one namespace is a substring of another. And then they could create full track names.
Do you want to open GitHub, Ted, or can you?
That would then be, they could create identical full track names, even though they each didn't think that they created a full track name that was identical. And a relay would have no way to know when it gets that track name where it should route it, because it's without more explicit guidance on how you should route, how you should match namespace, or how you can find the namespace part of a full track name. I'm not sure if that was a great. Do you want me to read off my issue, or do you want to just reshare it? I think. What did I say? So one possibility is we could try to just say, like, just don't do this. Like, you should, if people announce to you and somebody else announces a substring, then you can just say no, that's not cool. Or subscribe request itself could have, instead of just having a full track name string, it has two fields which are separate, like a tuple, instead of, so it's very clear, like this is the track name and this is the namespace, and you can use one for routing and one for selecting. Or we could tell everyone that, no, we're doing prefix matching and you have to do prefix matching in order for this to work. I think maybe, okay. That is my, like, I wasn't prepared to present on this issue, recollection. No, that's okay. And it formed a queue.
Oh, it looks like Suhas, you're first.
So Cisco, I tried to, like, Alan had three proposals, and I kind of inclined towards the first proposal in a way, and proposed another PR that tries to address some of these things. So the idea here was, if two publishers or producers announce the same track namespace, and if the authorization allows, the policy allows, for whatever reason the application decided to do that, in that case, the easiest thing to do is the last one wins. That way you not have in a situation where you have the consumer getting pieces of media from producer one and producer two. You'll get one. That's how your policy was, and that's not a bad design in general. Thanks.
Good.
Sorry, did you say last one wins?
Yes, last one wins if there's an overlapping namespace.
Oh, I'm glad I'm already in queue.
Okay. I just wanted, one thing you said, I just wanted to clarify, which is that it's not that two media producers announce the same namespace, it's that they announce namespace where one is a substring of another, of which one case is they announce identical namespaces. Will is next.
Yeah, Will Loakamai. I'm not sure this is a problem as long as we don't confuse announcing with discovery. So if I want to publish, I say I'm example.com/will, and I'm authoritative for anything with that prefix. You come to me, and all I do is I tell the next node up above me. That's it. How that node communicates it with the outside world is up to the application, the distribution application. As a subscriber, I give the full namespace and I give a track name. That's explicit. I don't give any subset of that. I give that full. How I map that subscription at the edge back to that origin one is a function of the distribution network.
So the ambiguity comes if you announce example.com/will and I announce example.com/w to the same node. And then someone wants to subscribe to something /will. Does that go to you? Or does it go to me if I have a track name called
It should throw an error because it's ambiguous. As soon as one of us goes first, right? The one who goes second, as soon as you announce that, your announcement should be rejected as being
that's a difficult problem to solve.
I don't think it is.
So you've just said first one wins. He just said last one wins. I'm still very glad I'm in the queue.
The winner should be the first one.
Luke's next.
Hi. So we do need to have a discussion about what we're even doing with this announce message. What's the role? In my view, the announce message is saying I'm producing this broadcast with this full string name. I don't understand why prefixes are a thing. Like, I don't want prefix routing. I don't want BGP or anything in my media protocol. I want to say that this is my string. If you want this broadcast, please request this exact string. I'm not a subset of it, this exact full string.
Can I clarify, when you say broadcast, that may encompass a number of tracks, more than one track?
Yes, that's a track namespace is a broadcast. I use them interchangeably.
I assume Ted's next.
Ted is next.
Ted Hardy, tuple enthusiast. So I have to say that when we were talking about this earlier, what we basically said is there is a namespace and there is an identifier underneath that namespace, and it is the tuple of the two which must be unique. And I think that's still where we ought to go, and I'm certainly fine with expressing them separately in two separate fields, because then you never have this problem about whether there are overlaps or not. If somebody says, hey, I'm authoritative for this namespace, and somebody has already got it, you have some either cryptographic or other method for determining who actually owns it, and you settle it that way. You don't do it first or last or some other way. This other problem of you want to smash them together to get a single identifier that looks the same, whether somebody has example.co mbop or example.com bop. Just don't do that. If you want to smash them together, go to Our Lady of Delimiters and ask for a delimiter. URIs provide them. Other things do as well. You just have to make sure that however you represent them, the code always treats them as a tuple. And if you do that, all of this falls away. You don't have to worry about who's first, who's second, or how they look on the wire to determine what's right. You just treat them as a tuple from the beginning, and Mbop's your uncle. Thank you.
You're next anyway, Colin.
So what do you do if they're exactly the same and you get two different announcers from different producers for exactly the same name, exact match? What are the two?
Okay, so if somebody says, I'm Google, and you say, no, I'm Google, then you have to go outside the system to determine who's Google using like a cryptographic mechanism or something else. But it is not based on the announcement at that point, because one of the two is lying to you or mistaken. It's not a problem caused by identifier overlap. It's an attack, or the equivalent poisoning to an attack.
Okay, I'm going to speak to that then and hang on. So no, I think that's not really attack. That happens here all the time. So, and what I'm going to talk about HA and our approach to that on the CDNs. So first of all, if the applications, like, look, you're going to have an authentication token that gave you some cryptographic material that said, I'm allowed to use this name. And we're on all of these, we're assuming that passed, right? Like if you don't have a valid token, obviously your announce gets thrown in the garbage. So we've already passed that stage, but these clients are not super reliable. They're falling off the internet all the time, and they're rejoining all the time. And they're probably going to, when they rejoin, not go through a whole different subscribe thing. They're going to try and set up as soon as they can, and they're going to re-announce with the same credential, the same track name, and it's going to be an identical announcement. And this is like, you know, Luke said he didn't want to do BGP, but since he brought up BGP, this is like a BGP update, right? And if you have the same specificity of the route, I think your latest one sort of has to win, is the earliest one to do. Now, we could try and detect all possible errors. That's really hard for the CDNs to do, I think. But to Ted's point, which I agree about the URIs, it's like, if this is not something you want to have in your application, you should make sure that none of your two clients ever in any things use the same URI to announce with, right? That's like, and that's easy for the application to do, and that's what it should do if it cares about this. The question is do the relays have to take the responsibility of enforcing all of that, and how do you tell the difference between a re-announce that's because somebody of reconnecting and a re-announce because something's said? And look, I'm ignoring the whole prefix thing here, but I think if we just talk about the exact match case and we come to consensus on that, which I think we have to solve, that's a much easier case to deal with. Then we can discuss the prefix case, and the answer is probably the same.
I think there might be two separate problems, right? I mean, I think this issue is really about the prefix case. The exact match case, I think, is different, right?
But the fact that none of us agree on the exact match is going to make the prefix case not like worth solving yet. But I mean,
so I have a clarifying question. So I have a clarifying question. And your clarifying question. Sorry. So in the case you just described, you have a client, as you say, that is less than it's got my connection to Meet Echo. It keeps dropping off and coming back. Why doesn't it use quick reconnection semantics to reset up exactly the same connection instead of that? Because in quick, I've got even new connection IDs. I can reuse the connection that I was using before at the quick layer. Why do I need to do it at the MOQT layer?
I mean, it probably didn't go to the same relay if you're talking about a scalable system, not Meet Echo.
Okay, so what we've got to do at this point is, I think you're right, narrow down to this reconnect problem, because I think the reconnect exact match problem is very distinct from the one that Alan was doing, and it sounds like there's semantics there that if we can't handle at the quick layer, we're going to functionally need similar semantics at the MOQT layer to what we have at the quick layer to allow reconnection that's distinct from reannouncement.
Yeah, that makes sense what you're saying, Ted, and how you phrase it. And I think that all of this, like the actual the match, the thing that drove this original issue of the partial match issue, which Alan had, and I mostly think that the answer to that is like, doctor, if that hurts, don't do it. So I'm less worried about that one, but I think it unveils a actual real problem we have, which has to do with about HA, high availability design, and we need to nail that.
So did I hear you volunteer? He said putting on his other hat to write up that issue, which is distinct?
Yeah, sure, all right.
Okay, so we got a new issue coming.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Market
Okay.
architectural.
Does that clear you from the queue also, Colin?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, Victor.
Regarding prefixes versus exact match, I agree with Ted. The tuples are really great. Do not do prefixes unless you can, unless you really need to. And if you need to, we should treat them separately, because track names with separated track namespace and track name, like for the specific reason. And I don't think we should treat track namespaces of prefixes. Regarding the reconnect issue, I do agree that the last one should win, because it's like just makes sense. There are only two possible answers I see. One is you take the latest one and assumes that the latest one is the current client that is trying to connect versus the previous client which fell off the network for some reason. And the second approach is you just, whenever your client falls off the network, you always error out, and instead of having Victor in conversation, you now have to add Victor asterisk, which is a behavior you have to support anyways, because if original Victor falls off the network and has the encoder crash, then you basically have to add a new video stream anyways. So those are the two cases, but I do agree that if we support re-announcing the exact same prefix, it should basically just mean to replace.
All right. Thank you. I am happy with that. Was great discussion. Thank you for everyone very much. Feel free to add more comments to the issue, as well as Colin for filing an issue. This is all the issues I had, but we can two things. We can pull up GitHub, or we can use the extra time today and go through more issues later in the week.
I don't know. Does anybody have an issue they want to talk about? I can spend a minute looking at the issue list, surface some. I'm sure there's one or two good ones.
Or we can pull up Will's stuff and do more issues.
That's what I was saying.
Yeah. All right. Will, are you ready to go?
Sure. Thank you very much. Please, if you want to discuss an issue, if you could tell me beforehand, and ideally, find me for 5 minutes and we can sit down together and make a slide, or you can make a slide, or whatever works for you, then we can make sure it gets discussed this week. Thank you.
Let's see. Grant preloaded slides. I have Grant. All right. You got it?
Not preloaded, I'm sharing the screen.
Oh, well.
Wrong one. Share screen.
Grant's screen.
Who's a Bill fan?
Okay, I think it's working. Good afternoon. My name is Will, and from Akamai. I wrote up the Warp draft overview. It was our first attempt, a stake in the sand, if you will, at creating a streaming format that's designed to work with MOQ. I was asked to present an update and proposals. We have a lot of people in the room who haven't yet been following the discussion. So for those who just started playing the game, I thought I would, I'm just going to hold this here so I don't get away from the mic. Just go over some of our summary. So we're media over quick, we're running over quick. We also like web transport in many instances, specific if we like to inherit the connect characteristics. And you've heard us speak about MOQ transport. This is a separate draft. It is basically a pub-sub protocol over which we can move binary messages. It doesn't know about media, doesn't know about football games, streams, conferences, anything like that. It's just moving objects. On top of it, then, we can map a series of streaming formats. These are the ones who understand the media. And this picture is actually back from IETF117. Since then, we now have Warp as a first pass at a streaming format. We have Lock, just came out. And I'm calling it Alan's chat. I don't know if Alan's actually written it, but it's a good academic argument to say, hey, we can do text chats over the same system. And we should force ourselves at any time we're getting too media-centric, remind us that it should work over chat as well. And why are we doing this? Basically, because we're trying to separate church and state, if you will. So on the bottom part, that's what a CDN builds, right? If you're in a CDN business, you just build the bottom half. And if you're in the media business, you build the top half. There are people who will read both sides, all the drafts. There are people who are building nodes that have to both understand the transport and produce or consume the media. But it's good to break it up. So Warp at a very high level was designed to deliver CMAF. And I'm going to go over Warp today. I'm actually, in the time I have, going to present some major changes to it. So let's not get too hung up on any of these items. Some of them are going to change. Warp came from a place where it's delivering CMAF because it's got good interop with much of the media ecosystem today. Focus on live and near live streaming, fragment the objects over MOQ, and there's a congestion response based on dropping objects, which we haven't yet defined, actually. There's a lot of other details in this. These are described previously, and I don't want to repeat them here. Two things I will highlight. There's this notion of a catalog. In Warp, it's a binary catalog that describes the availability of tracks. So it says, I'm producing these tracks. I'm either adding them or I'm no longer producing these tracks. And there's some init information that I can give you to help you help you decode the content and also select the tracks. What are the characteristics of the media? Is it HD video? Is it a codec that the client understands? And then some notes on packaging. And it was very CMAF specific. There's been some comments. I think, Cullen, you made it that, hey, if you don't come from a CMAF world, this gets confusing quite quickly. I acknowledge that, right? And also CMAF it's openly available, but it's not necessarily free. At the same time, it is the basis now over which much modern media is happening on the internet. So we should be interoperable with it. So does it work? So Luke, who's here, built a working version. There's Luke coming at you over MOQ transport plus Warp, at least an early version of it. He made some changes. Catalog is a string instead of a number. Versioning is not implemented, but that's not the point. The basic precepts here are that this is functional. Now, that doesn't mean we're done. In fact, there's multiple issues that need to be addressed. So what I want to do now is lay out over some slides some of the problems, some solutions, and then I'm also going to propose a new catalog format, and in fact, a change in structure, a change in architecture as to how we architect these streaming formats. So issue number one, and this is when I was talking to Ian, came up earlier, how do we simultaneously publish different streaming formats? I want to publish Warp and Lock and Chat all at the same time. So option number one is that we create a unique name and number for each catalog. So there's three ways to do it. I can call them catalog Warp, catalog Chat, catalog whatever. We have an IANA registry to prevent naming collisions. And you can either keep up with unique names or even unique numbers, depending on your predilection. That's one way to do it. Second way, we can create hierarchical catalogs. So I have one parent that's always called catalog. Within it, I can say I've got a type 0, an IANA registered type for Warp, and I'm going to call it any track name I like, and so on. Number three, you produce that single catalog. Within it, you describe all your available types. This is certainly feasible. The difference would be it would become a lot of overhead. If I want to make one change to my chat catalog, I'd have to go update the media one. So even though it's feasible, it's probably not very practical. And number 4 is we actually let the application transfer the format knowledge. So here I actually do have 2 different catalogs, both called catalog, but the path differentiates them. And this is how modern media works today. You ask for an HLS playlist. We actually use file extensions as our determinant. It's not particularly robust, but it works for billions of streams a day. So we could make any one of these 4 work. I'm not going to propose a solution. I hope we can spend time between meetings or maybe in our Wednesday slot to pick one of these. But I think within this lies 4 solutions for solving that problem of concurrent catalogs. Number 2, should WARP continue to support only CMAF? So arguments 4, by constraining it to CMAF, you constrain the amount of codecs any compliant client is required to support. There's a well-developed packager ecosystem and decoder ecosystem. It's available on most devices today. And if you have a catalog of content or you're producing OTT content in HLS or Dash segmented media, it's the gateway drug, if you will, for getting into media over quick. Arguments against it is we don't want to create a new streaming format every time we come up with a new container. It's really heavyweight for audio, 32 kilobit audio. Your ISA container is going to be larger than the payload. It's not natively supported by web codecs today. You want to mix them in certain types, and most components of a catalog are common. So in this one, I actually have preference. I think we should expand WARP to support more container formats. And in fact, we should make it extensible so we can support multiple container formats, which is a precursor to our WARP and LOC. And LOC is low overhead container. That's Mo and Suhas and Cullen's proposal that just came out. Are they sufficiently different that they should remain distinct? So on the WARP side, we have a binary catalog. We got a CMAF payload. We got this thing called delta updates. We can add and remove tracks. We have CMAF inits, and we have rules on how to map objects. On the LOC side, we got a JSON catalog. We got the LOC payload. We got profiles. We got relationships between tracks, which is very interesting. And we got mock object magic. So my proposal is, in fact, we merge these. We create a JSON catalog that supports both. We support different packaging types, either the CMAF side or what I'm calling the LOC, low overhead container side. We support delta updates. In fact, we add that to LOC. We support adding remove tracks, and we keep our mock object mapping. I see Ian queued for question, and I haven't paused to speak, so I should stop.
One really quick clarification question. You were talking about CMAF and extending to other formats. Would the intent be that there would be one or more formats like CMAF that would be required to be supported, or not?
So that's an interesting question. We face this dilemma. Anytime you add a codec to a standard, typically you get you wiggle out of it by creating profiles to say, oh, well, I only support the CMAF profile of whatever the standard is. Or yes, you're required to, as a decoder, support all of them. As a packager, you may only choose to support a subset of them. So I think if we focus on communicating what you're producing, and that's clearly enunciated, so a subscriber does not subscribe to something it does not support, then we can wiggle out of that problem and still work. Yeah. Cullen for Q.
Cullen, I mean, I think adding delta updates and add remove tracks to LOC are good improvements to it, not downside. So like, you know, I see no problem in that. I guess I think I do want to have something that I can say. We need to allow people who build products to be able to express that they're compatible with a given ecosystem, and they like if I said I support WARP, it's very clear what it means. I mean, we know I'm going to be able to deal with that CMAF stuff. Like, it's going to be mandatory to implement. You have to do some amount of CMAF to be able to do WARP. That's fine. But I think there'll be people who want to build systems that say, I don't support WARP, I support LOC. And now maybe WARP and LOC are two profiles on whatever, but I want to remain that property that people can say they support system X or system Y at that sort of container level, and the media, the mandatory to implement media codecs and stuff that come out of that. And I had sort of assumed we'd do that by saying different RFC numbers, but I'm certainly open to any other way to do it. But I think it's a good property to have, is that we can, we can't make it mandatory to implement. I mean, obviously the people doing CMAF are not going to do some of the web container SVC stuff. Never going to happen, right? So
I agree absolutely. And our challenge as a group is, do we want to spin out a new streaming format and say you support all of this, but it's a concise format, or do we create profiles within the one format? Victor is standing.
Two things. I think one of advantages to point out about the central pictures, which not sure if you've mentioned, but this means you can also mix different tracks in different formats. So
yes,
you can have
and I have an example coming up where we mix them.
The second one I wanted to, regarding profiles, I feel like the profiles, we should definitely define profiles, and they should be very much tailored to the specific use case. So I can imagine us having different profiles for even for delivery versus ingestion, because the people who work on ingestion probably have a very solid understanding of what specifically they want to build out of all of the pieces that we have on the diagram.
I agree. So this leads nicely into what might our architecture look like in a simplified fashion then. Today we just have one drop called WARF. So it's been discussed earlier. We could start with a catalog draft. It defines the versioning, the catalog naming, the track operations, add, delete, remove, change, track relationships, lip sync, time aligned, etc., and the packaging declarations. And then we have packaging drafts that tell you how to package CMAF over MOQ transport. We have another one for lock over MOQ transport. And I'm using lock here as a name, not lock the entire thing, but just lock for low overhead packaging. And then we might have another one for text. So when I rewrite WARP, then WARP is a wrapper around several RFCs. It points at the catalog RFC, it points at the CMAF one, it points at the lock one, and then there might be additional WARP logic, right, that ties it all together. It's authentication, subscription, what to do in the case of errors, how do I fail over, business type logic that I might want to put in there. And Alan's chat would inherit the same draft for catalog, incorporate only the text chat draft for packaging, and then have some specific logic. And we could create as many of these streaming formats as we felt necessary. But I think it's for interop and getting this off the ground, it's in our interests to reduce the diversity of streaming formats in the beginning so that we get at least broad support with a common one.
Suhas was in the queue from the last slide, and I'm sorry if I missed it.
No problem. This slide is more useful for me. Thanks. Suhas, I like this idea of separating catalog as a separate draft. Probably it will be new drafts that will come out. I'm happy to help out. And these 3 drafts. One concern or one question I have is that if I would implement a stack that would have the catalog, the lock, and just the catalog and the lock in it, would that mean that there will be another new draft that should come out, and should we call something new? Because WARP mixes CMAF in there, which we would not implement. So how should we?
Well, I think that's a repeat of the prior question. Do we profile one? Do we do sub-profiles of one streaming format, and you can support pieces of it? Or do we just make separate streaming formats and you must support all of it, but they're more constrained?
Right. That goes back to the point of what should the working group define as the RFC numbers here. Because at the end of the day, in implementation, you can do that, but I want to be very clear that as a working group, are we taking up defining a new streaming format that supports only catalog and lock? In that case, that would require another draft to be written, hence for clarification on that one.
Yeah, I think this group, we should create a draft just for catalogs, how to set them up, a draft for CMAF, a draft for how to package with lock with none of the other stuff in it. And then we should discuss whether we then want a separate draft for WARP and real-time streaming if we feel they're sufficiently different. Okay, I'm running out of time. Let me go through it. So what would this new harmonized catalog format look like? And I'm showing you JSON because it's super easy for people to grep, and we can have arguments about size later. And I think it's super readable. We got a format, a version. We got the namespace here that's inherited by all the subsequent tracks. And in fact, we can put stuff in this at the top level that is anything that's common can be inherited. We're saying here it's time aligned. The example here is a sports broadcast, by the way. I'm just doing audio and video in 2 different bit rates. And in my tracks, I've got an HD one. It's saying I'm packaged with CMAF. And here's the init segment, and it's in as base 64 because we're putting binary inside JSON. And I do that for each of my tracks. And I think you show this to anyone, they'll easily be able to implement this pretty quickly.
So I have a clarifying question on this. In looking at the merger that you were doing before, I was really struggling to understand what the value of that was over creating a format that was in fact a compound format. And so if you could say, okay, this is a harmonized catalog format where the format here has the ability to have different
packaging types
within it, why not just start from there and not make warp one thing, but just make the catalog type a compound catalog type distinct from the warp type or the lock type, in the same way you get multi-part as opposed to a single.
That is what I'm proposing. And if you go to a little example from now, you'll see multi-type in here as the example coming up.
So it doesn't, I guess what I'm going is, if you're going to do that, why do you need to unify warp and lock?
Because today they're two complete standards for how to, they both define a catalog. They duplicate each other to a large degree. And I'm suggesting removing a lot of the duplicates. And in fact, they're quite similar. The only real standout between the two is in how I package my audio and video content and how I describe it in terms of init or a quality profile.
I'm expressing myself very badly and I apologize. What I'm trying to say is, if instead of merging the two at any other level, we just take the catalog draft, which you intend to be separate anyway, and have the catalog draft describe how individual packaging formats use itself, including a compound format.
Okay, I think maybe we just have a semantic difference for what a catalog draft, the scope of it.
Yeah, if you expand the scope of the catalog draft, you can shrink the scope of lock and warp so that they don't need to be merged in order to accomplish what you want, I think.
Maybe. To me, a catalog draft's going to define this JSON syntax, right? What can be in it, what can't be in it, and if what's in it, what's the scope of what's allowed.
Okay, I think
and then I still want to wrap it with something, though. I
think we've moved beyond my clarifying question. So why don't you keep going?
Moving on. So that sport broadcast happened.
One sec. Mo, you're in the queue.
Oh,
you have
sorry,
a clarifying question? You want to come later? Okay.
Okay, so let's go quick. So this is, how do I remove the tracks? So basically, I just announced the namespace. I got some tracks. I got a track operation. We have an enumerated operation of 0, which means this track's done. And this is, in fact, one way to terminate a broadcast, a clean termination. I just publish a catalog that says I got no more tracks in this broadcast. And I would really encourage us strongly. One of the problems with segmented media is you never quite know when the stream's finished. And we're left with all these hanging clients all over the place. So we should really be robust in our termination strategy. Number 3, so now we shift to the conference side. So same catalog format, but now I got lip-synced audio and video. I got 2 tracks. They're both packaged low overhead containers, not CMAF, and I'm inserted a quality profile for each one of them. This is pretty much identical to lock as it exists today. And there's no mention of CMAF here because there's no CMAF being used. Example number 4, this is a Delta update. So say that conference user, Alice, wants to add slide share. We don't want to republish the catalog repeating all the audio and video she was publishing before. So now we basically add in a parent sequence number. This is telling us that this catalog depends on a prior one that's uniquely identified by that parent sequence number. And it defines the namespace and the tracks audio and video, which are not described here. So we don't need to repeat them. We're just adding in slides. We're saying it's lip synced with the rest. And then we define our slide track and its quality profile. So you can have small little updates. You don't have to re-describe the entire thing every time. Example number 5, this is the mixed format. So I got CMAF and lock. So my video, in this case, is packaged with CMAF. It's got an init segment. The audio is coming in as Opus with a low overhead container. Is that a comment?
Sorry, yeah, Jonathan Lennox site. I didn't click on the tool. That does mean that however timestamps are defined in lock and however timestamps are defined in CMAF have to be defined to be meaningful if they're going to be time aligned. Yes.
Yes.
I'm not.
No, I think that's why it's time aligned. We got to define rules for that, and how you would actually blend the two together.
Yeah, I think that gets tricky because those tend to be specified by the catalog, by the container formats.
Yeah. And Victor sitting in front of you, this was one of Victor's use cases. So maybe Victor has ideas on how we would tie the two together.
I feel like we have to define some unified timing model anyways, because I'm not sure if CMAF probably solves it itself as list of log. Like you would also have to add a field to define the start timestamp, which is to say that if someone joins a video call like 2 minutes earlier, you still need to figure out how to align it to the timings of previous streams.
Yeah.
So this is one of the problems we would just have to deal with. And if we're mixing formats, it probably means we should deal with it at the catalog level.
Agreed.
A couple more folks jumped in.
Oh,
Suhas
okay, let me
and
go back.
Luke, do you want to take more questions, or are you close to
Well,
what do you
I
wanna
got
do?
2 more slides after this. I don't know what our time
We
is.
have 10 minutes left.
Okay.
I'll be quick
Yeah.
here. I think this is one of the kind of advanced use cases. We might want to come revisit it once we figure out the base use cases on separating the other things you're proposing today.
That's it.
Okay. Then number 6, this is throwing everything together and adding in. So we got video in CMAF, we've got audio in lock, and we got a captions track coming from a different namespace. And this was one of Ted's earlier requests, where there's a third-party captioning service that's producing content. So we got a namespace that's sports.example.com that's supplying video with CMAF, audio with lock, and then we have an external namespace, captions.example.net, that's supplying us CMAF encapsulated captioning. So this is how we can mix namespace content inside a single catalog, and in fact, mix packaging formats at the same time. So this is about the most complex catalog of the 6 presented. Then final slide, just some additional optimizations we can consider. We can only add sequence number for Delta updates. In fact, I did that. We can collapse the streaming format to a tuple because we're tuple fans in this group. We should, I think, describe quality parameters for CMAF tracks. The reason being that there's JavaScript clients that have to make the decision about what track to play, but don't have the MP4 parser necessarily to extract the information. They might just hand it to a decoder. So I don't think it's a lot of overhead to repeat the quality information, and I would at least it would keep our track descriptions consistent between the CMAF side and the lock side. Whether we do JSON with binary, JSON converted to binary or binary to JSON, everyone has religion, but I like the convenience of JSON at the beginning until we prove that it's too large for good usage. And then track descriptors, we need to add additional things in there that aren't there today, like labels for UI, role designator, accessibility in order to make it legal for broadcast in the US, and also ratings designator. We've got a lot of broadcast compliance issues that we should also look at for here. But those are relatively trivial to add to the track description. That concludes the summary. Jordi, up for question?
Yeah, clarification question about the previous slides. So
Yeah.
could you help me understand what lip sync means and what's the difference with time aligned?
What's the difference with?
Between lip synced and time aligned.
I would ask Mo, because that's Mo's creation.
Mosin, I think we're going to eliminate lip sync. Timeline, I think, captures it all, and lip sync is sort of implied by. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I saw lip syncers. I was roughly close to each other because I didn't have a timing model, and time aligned would be down to the microsecond.
I mean, technically, like in RTP, there is support for everything is already time aligned. The timing is essential in RTP, but then lip sync is another signal saying these tracks are explicitly intended to be lip synced. So, force their play out to be at the precise same time.
Okay.
So that's a little bit of a nuanced semantic in RTP that we thought we'd extend to this catalogs. But the more I think about it, the more unnecessary it is. And it's usually an implicit decision that this audio and this video will be played.
They're either
out
time aligned or they're not. Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe I need to discuss this with Mo, but I disagree with that a bit. Time aligned will be applied to simulcast as well, where saying with my 3 quality streams are time aligned, and there is that's the indication for the receiver to kind of play only one, because you don't want to play all the 3 qualities at a time. Whereas lip sync is like I want to play these 2 tracks together when I play out. So there is a subtle difference that has to be made.
Okay. So we should probably invent better names for them if they're intended to be displayed or consumed. Either consume these together or don't consume them at all.
Right. Yeah, we need to discuss this a bit, and I'm not disagreeing, but some clarification has to be done. Thanks.
Yeah, go, Jody.
There's a little bit of a queue.
I would argue
sorry.
if it's time aligned, if it's lip sync.
So Mo, Victor, and Ali are in the queue.
Mosinati, I think I strongly support this overall direction. From day one, I've always argued to have a separate catalog from the media formats. And in fact, I think the catalog is a media format. Everything that is transported as a mock object, I think, should be in the registry of media formats. And the catalog is obviously transported as a mock object. So it's just another format, just like the CMAF objects and the lock objects, you have catalog objects. So I strongly suggest that we go with this, central catalog format. I'm still not completely grokking the separation between having the packaging formats as one other thing, and then the overall streaming format as another thing. I think there's still a little bit of fuzziness around whether that concept is needed or not. And then architecturally, document-wise, how we do it. Clearly, there's going to be a catalog document, but I'm still fuzzy about this overall streaming formats thing that ties all of them together. I think that may need some more thought before we go in that direction.
Okay.
Victor.
Yeah, I think one of the useful things that catalog does, and one of the most important, is that it would let you communicate the alternative versions of the same track. And there are many notions of alternatives. For instance, one of them is you can have CMOF H.264, but it's like the same stream, but it's 2 megabits versus 6 megabits. Another version is you can have like CMOF H.264 versus CMOF AV1, or you can have like, say, audio. You can have LOC Opus 48,000 stereo, and then you have CMAF with like 5.1 sound, and like there is like the difference in both alternatives in terms of player support, but also alternatives in terms of different quality, and it is important for the format to capture those alternatives.
Dash does that with adaptation sets today. So you would put your Dolby audio in one adaptation set, your stereo AAC in another.
Okay, so there are like multiple axes here. There's like axis of, do I support this format? Then there is axis of which quality do I want? There is the axis of, does my hardware support that many channels? And then there is axis of like language, which language audio track. And some of those might be captured by like the containers themselves. For instance, if you have like languages, that might be a tag inside CMAF, but some of them would have to be captured by the catalog.
Okay. Okay, so there's a few more people in the queue. We're down to our last couple of minutes, and remember, we are going to talk about this again on Wednesday, and hopefully in between. So don't, try to keep it brief.
Okay, Ali Began. Will, I have a question first. This init line base 64 encoded data is supposed to be read and processed by whom?
By the client that consumes the track. So it was used as initialization to init its decoder. And also, that init contains the information on the resolution, the width, the height, the codec, and the codecs. Yes, so it would know if it could even decode this content.
But then you want to know this information before actually you send the data to the decoder.
Yes, you want it, because in this case, it's performing a dual function. It's describing the content as well as serving as its
So my
init.
JavaScript client is supposed to understand.
Well, that's why one of the improvements I suggested is we in fact repeat the quality profile for the CMAF track so that your JavaScript client doesn't have to parse that init.
And what do you mean exactly by the quality tag? I mean, it's
the one there, that quality profile. If you read through the lock spec, it defines a string.
Because there's a bunch of stuff that we need to actually know, like the codec, the profile, the codecs profile, all that stuff.
That is all described in the init segment for CMAF.
Okay.
And that's what Luke built a solution that works.
All right. And my comment on this, harmonizing the catalog formats or not, I mean, I'm still trying to understand how many people have actually the use case for this kind of stuff, like combining a CMAF video track with a non-CMAF audio track, because as people pointed out, lip sync issues or time alignment actually requires some sort of external signaling here. And I don't know whether actually that's really a good trade-off in terms of reducing the overhead or not. I mean, I would prefer to keep them separate, as I think most of the people will either use CMAF-based stuff or log-based stuff.
But you could keep them separate in your world,
Yes,
but
yes,
do
I
you
can.
want to prohibit other people from mixing them?
No,
would be the
I'm
question.
not, I'm just trying to understand.
Okay.
Yeah, I just had a quick question since I had started writing that chat paste draft, and so I was writing my own catalog format, making it up whole. Is the idea with if there was a unified catalog draft, would that also get tied to the transport, where like anybody who wanted to do anything catalog related has to use the format that's defined there, or is it still, if somebody wants to do something over MOQ, they can write their own catalog?
Two answers as I see it. One is we could force you that anytime you use a streaming format, you must use this catalog draft. I think that's a little constraining. So in fact, I would define maybe an interface in MOQ transport for catalogs. And you can go write your own catalog draft, but it must just match the interface. And we provide an example. So we manage and produce the common catalog format, but we don't prohibit other people from making them or from future ones improving them. And we define an interface to make sure it's interoperable. We want that to be non-changing, right? We don't want to, once you have a MOQ transport implementation, you don't want to change it. And that's the cool part about separating them, was you can innovate on the streaming format side all day, change it on the weekend. We don't have to go change our distribution architecture.
Okay, thanks. Jonathan, we're already over time, so real quick, and then we'll go on.
I think is an appropriate closing comment as we edge ever closer to SDP. Now that we have lock, we should just go and combine it with offer answer, and our specs are called Loco and Loca. Thank you very much.
Muchos loco.
And we'll return on Wednesday, having recovered from that final comment. Mo, you're in queue. You'll be first up on Wednesday when we return to this topic. Thanks everybody for being here. If you haven't already signed the blue sheet by scanning into the tool, please do so now. That makes sure that we have enough room in Prague not to be in a cramped room. So please do make sure you do that. And we'll see you on Wednesday.
And Martin, come claim your chocolate.
Became close and then disappeared.
Something else was more important. Shockingly. I don't know how I feel about having